Presence when the machine is open. The following member is excused. Representative Hatfield. Of all the members voted, tie the roll. Roll call shows 97 members present. The chair declares quorum for conducting business. House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when we do adjourn, we adjourn until April 18, 2023 at 10 a.m. Representative Lehman.
Heard the motion second. All those in favor indicate saying aye. Those opposed no. Motion is adopted. That is 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. We'll begin on the third reading calendar. Senate Bill 1, Representative Vermilion. Chair hands down on final passage, Senate Bill 1.
Senate Bill 1, a bill for enactment in the Indiana Code concerning human services and to...
Chair recognizes Representative Vermilion to speak on the bill.
Let's try it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. Last year, Indiana ranked 42nd in the U.S. for access to and quality of mental health care. 42nd. And the suicide rates increased by 10%. Now, it's easy for us to believe that this increase was a continuation of the effects of the pandemic, the isolation and the sadness that we all felt, but it really has not been. And the reality, these past 3 years exposed what was already failing, which is a non-integrated behavioral health system in Indiana, a siloed system of care that was established in 1963 by President Kennedy. It was built for a world that no longer exists. So Senate Bill 1 is the fruitfulness of this General Assembly in believing and passing the creation of the Behavioral Health Commission. It allowed that commission a blank sheet of paper for mental health, for the mental health industry and the Hoosiers to dream, what if? Senate Bill 1 addresses the foundation of a system that is no longer working, and it also creates a roadmap for successful stories and outcomes in mental health in the substance abuse world in Indiana. Now, I'll take a minute and ask each of you to look up and think of the one person that you know in your life that's been affected by mental health or substance abuse. A loved one, a neighbor, maybe even you, I will say for sure for me, that have been profoundly affected by mental health and substance abuse. And ask yourself, did the current Indiana mental health system created in 1963 fail them? And it's so hard to say yes, it might have failed them. So Senate Bill 1 will ensure a different outcome for our loved ones in the future, ensuring that every Hoosier has 3 components of a behavioral health system available to them: someone to call, someone to respond, and some place to go. Senate Bill 3 outlines first giving all Hoosiers in crisis, someone to call. That'll be through the establishment of the 988 crisis line, a collaborative network of 988 centers who will respond to every call, every chat, and every text they get in a standardized manner with a trained professional immediately, their immediate lifeline saying, "I've got you." Secondly, Senate Bill 1 sets up someone to respond in person. Those are mobile crisis teams that will be established across Indiana, ready to be dispatched by the 988 centers for individuals who need in-person support. Hoosier coming right to them personally and saying, I'm here for you. And lastly, Senate Bill 1 will give Hoosiers in crisis some place to go, a safe place for help. So through the crisis stabilization units across Indiana, they will be open to receive individuals whose crisis could not be diverted by just a text or a chat by the 988, or even the mobile crisis teams that come directly to them. So the third component of Senate Bill 3 is the crisis stabilization units, and the way I say it is some Hoosier saying, hold my hand, let's get you to the place that you need. Senate Bill 1, simply put, is committing to creating a behavioral health system that is for today's world. Someone to call, someone to respond, and some place to go. I'd like to thank Senator Kreider for his passion. I'd like to thank every person in that mental health and behavioral health community that has engaged their community members. I know all of you have listened to your constituents about that. So many people have put blood, sweat, and tears into this theory of making Indiana better in the mental health space. And also, thank you. I think we all together have over 60 co-sponsors. I'd appreciate your support on Senate Bill 1.
Further discussion on the bill? Chair sees none. The author has the right to close. She waives it. Questions on file pass to the bill. All those in favor will, machines up, vote aye. Those opposed, vote no. While the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 96 ayes, 3 noes. The bill has passed. The title of the bill remains the title of the act. Clerk shall inform the Senate of the passage of the bill. Senate Bill 3, Representative Thompson. The chair hands down final passage. Senate Bill 3.
Senate Bill 3, a bill for an act concerning taxation.
Chair recognizes Representative Thompson to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Senate Bill 3 sets up a task force, and it come out of the Senate having as a 2-year process. We amended it on second to make it a 1-year process and have the Speaker appoint the chair. My guess is we'll resolve this in conference committee, but I ask for your support at this point. Thank you.
For discussion on the bill? Chair sees none. Author has the right to close. He waives it. Questions on final pass of the bill. All those in favor will, machines open, vote aye. Those opposed, vote no. Representative Jackson. While the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 98 ayes, 0 noes. The bill has passed. The title of the bill remains the title of the act. Clerk shall inform the Senate passes the bill. Senate Bill 4, Representative Barrett. Chair hands down final passage. Senate Bill 4.
Senate Bill 4, a bill for an act amending the Indiana Code.
Chair recognizes Representative Barrett speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we've all heard the debate this year, our public health metrics as a state are horrible. Whereas we lead the country in some of our economic indicators, our workforce is a key component of that, and our workforce is floundering. The coordinated state spend on this is minimal. As many of you now know, the lion's share of funding for public health is at the county level. In many of our counties, they're strapped for those resources. And there is an incredible disparate level of life expectancy, even from the best to the worst county throughout our state. You know, unfortunately, the timing of this comes on a public health crisis. And during that period, deficiencies were magnified. It only brought to light the fact that this was uncoordinated, poorly funded, and this was our opportunity to make a difference. The options: turn a blind eye and to continue to neglect this huge feature of our what we offer our Hoosier citizens. The other option: create a system with the appropriate guardrails, maintain local control, incorporate grants, add accountability. These are all features that have worked for this body in the past. To those that have received negative feedback on Senate Bill 4, let me just tell you, the Senate Bill 4, when it hit this chamber and where it's leaving today are two different things. And this is Senate Bill 4 asterisk. And we have done things in this bill that are critical in providing local control, state funding with the appropriate feedback mechanisms. We've learned so much from the safety pin grant program, from the grant program that we did in 1007. Those systems have been in place now for probably 6 to 8 years and have been highly effective. The gains that we can gain in trauma prevention and maternal and infant mortality are huge. The folks that think that this is new entry into healthcare spending, I'll remind all of them that we currently spend $15 billion a year in Medicaid. This is a 1% of that investment in public health, education, prevention, screening, early detection, all the while improving access, respecting informed consent, respecting privacy, strengthening local control, and all centered around voluntary participation. With those changes in place, I think we have produced a product here that your county executives have an opportunity to both opt in and opt out at will. And because of that, I would ask for your support on Senate Bill 4.
For discussion on the bill. Chair sees none. The author has the right to close. He waives it. Question is on final pass of the bill. All those in favor will. Machines open, vote aye. Those opposed, vote no. Representative Pack, Representative King. Representative King, would you like to vote? If all the members voted, the tie of the roll. Roll call says 78 ayes, 21 noes. The bill has passed. Shall the title of the bill remain the title of the act? Clerk shall inform the Senate of the passage of the bill. Senate Bill 7, Representative Barrett. Chair hands down final passage Senate Bill 7.
Senate Bill 7, a bill for an act to amend the Indiana Code concerning.
Chair recognizes Dr. Barrett to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I left my notes back at my desk, so I'm going to just take this one by pure recall. Senate Bill 7 deals with physician non-competes. The whole purpose of this, in my mind, is for ultimate respect of the doctor-patient relationship. So many of us have had that bond and that communication that sometimes gets interfered and interrupted with because of the current state of medicine. This bill came to the House extremely broad, absolutely banning non-competes amongst all physician groups. What we did in this House was we carved out primary care physicians based on the thought that these are the ones that actually have the standard core and bank of patients, it's otherwise closed. The relationship that's built between the doctors and those patients is significant, especially as we're dealing with the health crisis that we have in this state. So essentially, we carved out the primary care docs. We tied that to the definition that we established in 1004, where we had even provided some incentivization to independent practice. We then also respect the contract that's done between professionals. And we did put some clauses in there that allow an out if there's termination without cause, and a couple other fine points that we added. And then finally, as the current statute stands, it allows for a remedy and buyout for an unreasonable amount. The problem was that was often tied up in the courts, and that would result in significant delays, all of which the doctor was not able to practice in that community and take care of that bank of patients, all which has been a consistency policy line throughout this bill. So with that said, we added the remedy of mediation under a limited time frame to arrive at remedy without a significant change to the policy line. So this went through a lot of discussion. I appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into this at the committee level, and I would ask for your support.
For discussion on the bill, Representative Judy, speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the General Assembly. I just want to thank Representative Barrett for working on this issue with me for the last couple of years. I want to thank Representative Morris. He actually was the originator of this bill about 6 years ago. And I want to thank Representative Shively as well. She's been instrumental in working on this legislation. This is huge to our community. I've watched too many doctors leave our community because they wanted to continue to practice, but they had to wait that year to actually be able to come back to our community. Actually, right now, as of February, my family has to travel to Upland, Indiana, 60 miles away, to see our doctor so that he can come back in a year and actually see us again in Fort Wayne. So again, we voted on this last year. The biggest difference was it's now mediation instead of arbitration, and I just ask for your support. Thanks.
For discussion on the bill. Chair sees none. Would the author like to close? He would not. Question is on final pass of the bill. All those in favor, will machines vote aye. Those opposed, vote no. While the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 81 ayes, 17 noes. The bill has passed. So the title of the bill remain the title of the act. Clerk shall inform the Senate of the passage of the bill. Senate Bill 100, Representative Behning. Chair hands down on final passage Senate Bill 100.
Senate Bill 100, a bill for enactment of the Indiana Code concerning education.
Chair recognizes Representative Behning. Speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this is a various ed bill, and I will try to be as quick as possible. It requires State Board of Education to establish procedures for regional and national accrediting bodies that seek to accredit our non-public schools. They are to put together a procedure as well as a timeline. They also do the same thing for schools who apply to State Board for accreditation. There's also language in this bill dealing with learning loss recovery, which the learning loss program, which we passed in House Bill 1000, House Enrolled Act 1008, 2021. According to the department, there's $72 million still unspent in that fund, and the department has requested that that money be available and could still be spent through the biennium. Ways and Means said that no more than what is currently in the fund would be available to be spent through the biennium. We actually added some language dealing with the GPS dashboard, which is the dashboard the Department of Education maintains in regards to our schools, which would include things like discipline incident data, socioeconomic poverty data, proportion of fully licensed teachers in each school. We put language in dealing with and require that credit be given for Algebra 1 that's taken as 8th graders for an academic honors program diploma, because in the past that has not been accepted. And the last thing we did is we tweaked language that was put in place at the request of the department dealing with the enrichment scholarship account from House Enrolled Act 1251 of last year. With that, I would appreciate your support.
For discussion on the bill, Dr. Smith, speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. This bill passed out of committee with bipartisan support. The one area that I'm most interested in and pleased that we are taking action on it is the extension of the recovery grant programs to make up for the loss of learning that occurred during the COVID period. I urge your support for the bill.
For discussion on the bill, Chair sees none. The author has right to close. He waives it. The question is on final pass of the bill. All those in favor will, when the machines open, vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. While the members vote, they tell the roll. Roll call shows 98 ayes, 0 noes. The bill has passed. Shall the title of the bill remain in the title of the act? Clerk shall inform the Senate of the passage of the bill. Senate Bill 187, Representative Speedy. Chair hands down on final passage, Senate Bill 187.
Senate Bill 187, a bill for enactment in the Indiana Code concerning public safety.
Chair recognizes Representative Speedy to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, Senate Bill 187 is a pretty simple bill. It has two parts. The first part requires a local unit to come up with an ordinance that regulates their police reserve officers. Police reserve officers are those who work second jobs from their primary agency. They could be working for another agency, they could be working for a private business, or they could simply be a volunteer. In order to increase accountability and information, this bill would allow the Law Enforcement Training Board to modify, restrict, or otherwise prohibit the ability of some officers to have these second jobs, if you will. And it also exchanges information to make sure that those who have a disciplinary record that will follow them to their next job so that people can make informed decisions about hiring them. The second part of this bill has to do with park rangers. Park rangers in the city of Indianapolis are unique law enforcement officers in the state of Indiana that work and coordinate closely with IMPD in apprehending perpetrators and suspects and are armed, and they are worthy of death benefits like any other law enforcement officer in the list provided in our statute, and that's what this bill does, is to extend death benefits to park rangers in the state in Indianapolis, which is really the only park rangers, city park rangers in the state of Indiana. Thank you.
For discussion on the bill, Chair sees none. The author has right to close. He waives it. Question is on final pass of the bill. All those in favor will, when the machines open, vote aye. Those opposed vote no. Representative King, would you like to vote? Of all the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 98 ayes, 0 noes. The bill has passed. Shall the title of the bill remain in the title of the act? Clerk shall inform the Senate of the passage of the bill. Senate Bill 242, Representative Baird. Chair hands down final passage, Senate Bill 242.
Senate Bill 242, a bill for an act to repeal a provision.
Chair recognizes Representative Baird to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I present Senate Bill 242 for your consideration. It passed out of the Senate 40-5, passed out of the House Natural Resources Committee unanimously. Senate Bill 242 empowers landowners while keeping the state floodplain maps intact as provisional maps, allowing the DNR time to make the data more accurate while communicating with local communities, floodplain administrators, and landowners. More specifically, Senate Bill 242 does three things. Senate Bill 242 provides that during the 2-year period beginning July 1st, 2023, state floodplain mapping data may not be used by floodplain administrators of a county or municipality when reviewing a permit application for a structure or construction of any activity in or near a floodplain unless upon the request of the petitioner, and I repeat because I think that's an important part, unless upon the request of a petitioner. So the option is still there for the landowners. After June 30th of 2025, the bill provides specific requirements that the DNR must follow before that mapping data can go into effect and used as best available data. Finally, regarding the sales of a property, there is language in there that a disclosure must be made by the landowner if any portion of the property is in a floodplain. I'd like to thank my co-sponsors, Chairman Lindauer, Dr. Barrett, and Representative Prescott, and I'd ask for your support on Senate Bill 242. Thank you.
For discussion on the bill, Representative Hamilton speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I rise in opposition to Senate Bill 242. Last week, I was asked if the state LiDAR maps are currently recognized by FEMA, but I think it's important to know that FEMA allows and encourages states to develop their own maps. It would be impossible, I've been told by a certified floodplain manager, it would be impossible for FEMA to approve maps for all states in a timely manner. Thus, they empower states to do that work themselves. And in fact, of course, they have recognized Indiana with a national award for our maps. So clearly, they value the LiDAR maps as best technology maps that they will ultimately apply for in Indiana. And so the new language in the bill that prohibits the use of LiDAR-based maps could create a real problem, especially because some of the FEMA maps that are already in place today are LiDAR-based maps. So those maps would not be eligible under this law. So that could lead to more permit applicants having to hire their own engineers or surveyors, so that adds cost to projects, potentially thousands of dollars added to projects. They'd have to go through the DNR process, could delay projects. That should be a big concern with this bill today. There was also a question about the accuracy of LiDAR maps. This technology, again, according to the professionals and certainly folks all over the world that are using this technology today, it comes within 0.5 to 10 millimeters. That's less than half an inch accuracy. These maps have been used by FEMA since the early 2000s. We also heard about the appeals process. There is actually an appeals process today. DNR acknowledged that in committee. So there is that remedy for property owners if they think that that is something they should pursue. I want to just highlight one of many major flood issues that we've dealt with in our state in recent years. 15 years ago, in 2008, Bartholomew County, as many of you know, had a major, major flood event. Early estimates, it was at least $150 million in damages to that community, just $23 million alone at the local hospital. You know what? It is our job to use the information we have to prevent or at least reduce destructive and deadly and wildly expensive flooding in our communities. The Drainage Task Force established last year is established to make recommendations about this. Let's let them do their job. They haven't made recommendations yet. Let's let them come back next year with some recommendations about this complex and important issue. There has been a headline here in Indianapolis for the last couple of weeks that says, Indiana has new data to protect Hoosiers from flooding. Lawmakers don't want us to use it. That's the truth, and that's really unfortunate. This is a difficult issue. It's caused some properties to lose value, and that's a concern for all of us. But we can't unknow what we know. We know that the DNR maps are highly accurate. We know that FEMA supports using them. And we know that water always wins. We know that with this bill, the legislature is saying, let's pretend these maps created to protect our communities from the extreme costs and destruction of flooding, let's pretend they don't exist. This bill is irresponsible and will increase risk floods to our communities, and I urge you to vote no. Thank you.
For discussion on the bill, Representative Morris, speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I just want to point out, Representative Hamilton just said that the DNR acknowledged something in committee. It must have been a Senate committee because in environmental affairs in the House, the DNR did not take the time to show up and testify. So I just want to set that record straight. Thank you.
For discussion, Representative Boyd, speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I rise in opposition to this bill as well. The task force hasn't finished their work, like Representative Hamilton said. They still have a year to go. They need to work on this because they really need to get these maps on the FEMA location. Right now, you cannot get insurance for floods unless you are in a FEMA participating community. There's a list of them on the website if you want to look at the Indiana website. If you're not in one of those and you have a flood, you aren't covered for anything. The state insurance website says that standard homeowners insurance will not cover flood loss. They may cover a hydrostatic pressure endorsement for increased exertion of water on the foundation of your structure, but which frequently accompanies the rising waters, but it only covers the collapse of the structure. Some homeowners' policies provide coverage for backup of sewers or drains, but they don't include backup of drains if there's a flood. Real flood insurance is a special policy that's federally backed by the National Flood Insurance Program. I think it's a good idea that we increase these maps, but if we're not going to have them covered by FEMA, no one's going to get any relief from this. And I think the only good part of this bill is that there is a section where the requires a property owner to disclose in a real estate disclosure form whether any portion of a real estate is located in a floodplain as determined by FEMA. And right now, that's only covered for tenants rather than for homeowners. So I think that's the only good part of the bill. I rise in opposition.
Thank you, Representative Boyd. Further discussion? Representative Arrington, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I, too, rise in opposition to this bill. We should be using the best available data to make these decisions on where to build when there's possible flooding. And that, from everything I've seen, are these maps that the Department of Natural Resources has developed with the new technology. And so the map that is being proposed will change how we look at the flooding, but it doesn't change the weather. The weather is going to go where it's lower ground. And so what we're doing here is saying, let's just wait and see what happens. What we need to be doing is prevention as opposed to trying to fix things up after the barn door is open. So if I'm a homeowner or a property owner, I want to know whether my property is eligible for flooding. And having the best maps possible is the best way for me to know. So I encourage your no vote on this bill.
Thank you, Representative Arrington. Further discussion? Representative Abbott to speak on the Senate bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I beg to differ. I respect the opinions, but I really believe we can't wait. As you know, you look back, these maps rolled out in 2018, and starting there, we've made exceptions for properties that were built prior to good notice. They had a permit, and they were allowed to get out there and build that home, and then being told they had to remove it, raise it, or tear it down. So we've had examples of the accuracy. City of Woodburn, I brought this up before. They've never had floodwaters. They had a 34 addition home addition that had to be put on hold because the DNR said they were in a floodplain. They came back and they made a correction. Says, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're not in a floodplain." The determination was allowed them to continue working. So what we're saying, let's just put this on pause. Just put it on pause for 2 years, and let's look at what the drug task force can do, drainage task force can do, and just take a look at what we're really doing. We're allowing, like Representative Baird said, 3 options. The property owner can use the FEMA maps. They can use engineering study, which we've always done, and it's always been compliant with the National Floodplain Insurance Program. We're also allowing them the 3rd option. Use the DNR maps if you feel that's more accurate. Nothing's changing. We're even including the use of the DNR maps. We're putting the control in the property owner. And we found that it's not going to violate the National Floodplain Insurance. FEMA does not require
the use of the DNR maps, although they do say other data can be submitted. And the Bankers Association does not require anything but the FEMA maps. And lastly, as I said before, the flood consultant that they use, 70% of the banks in Indiana use this consultant or other consultants like that. They're saying the accuracy of the modeling that's done in these water levels, you can have 1/10 accuracy, although I debate that. I think it's still 2 feet, and that's what I've been told. But regardless, even if it was 0 accuracy or 0% error, what's determining that water level? That's subjective. That's done by modeling, and you can run different modeling profiles and get different water levels. That's been told to me by the experts. I think that in itself determines the fact that we need to take a deeper look at this. We can't wait 2 years. We can't wait for the drug task force to be done because you've got property owners that are suffering. We need to address these property owners, these new homes that want to be built. I think that needs to be addressed now, and it still allows good protection for floodplain issues and flood wall issues. So I urge your support of this bill.
Thank you, Representative Abbott. Is there further discussion? The chair sees none. The author has the right to close. He would like to.
I'd just like to point out 3 things. First of all, I want to say I don't think anybody in this room wants to see a constituent build in a floodplain. I think last year we saw an exception that was made when we had constituents that talked to their local floodplain administrators. They were given permits. They were allowed to build their home, and then the state came in and said, you need to demolish your home because you built in a floodplain. And that's exactly what this bill is trying to prevent. So that we're not coming back in here every year and making an exception. Let's put these maps on pause. Let's empower our landowners. We're still allowing, so I want to address 3 points. First of all, one of the points was increased cost. By allowing the petitioner to use the DNR maps, that is actually circumventing that argument of increasing cost, because they can use those maps and save time, save costs. But it also allows them the opportunity to use a survey. Go back to 2018 and what we did in 2018, allowing landowners to decide what is the actual best data for their property. And then the other argument was the LIDAR federal maps. So there's actually a provision on page 3, line 12 that would exclude that argument and does not make that a valid argument. So I'd again ask for your support of Senate Bill 242. Thank you.
Question is on final pass of the bill. All those in favor will, when machines don't vote aye. Those opposed vote no. While the members of the title of the roll call shows 73 ayes, 25 noes. The bill has passed. So the title of the bill remain the title of the act. Clerk shall inform the Senate pass to the bill. Senate Bill 252, Representative Negele. Chair hands down final passage. Senate Bill 252.
Senate Bill 252, a bill for an act to amend the Indiana Code.
Chair recognizes Representative Negele to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Senate Bill 252 would allow long-acting reversible contraceptives already issued to Medicaid individuals to be reissued to another Medicaid recipient. To explain further, when a Medicaid individual requests a LARC for their health care provider, the health provider orders the LARC, and the LARC is sent to the health provider. The LARC is issued and tied to that Medicaid individual. The Medicaid individual must return for a visit for implantation. If the individual does not return for the second visit, the LARC sits on a shelf, and until that Medicaid individual returns, or when the device expires, it must be thrown out. And that is wasteful and costly for our health care providers. Senate Bill 252 would permit a provider to reissue that LARC to another Medicaid recipient, easing access for Medicaid individuals and saving Indiana health providers, ultimately Hoosiers' money, health care costs. And they have up to 12 weeks unless they notify the provider if they don't want it. Additionally, we added some language on second reading. And Senate Bill 2, during special session, we had added some specific language for an advisory board to look at doula reimbursement. And in this amendment, what we did is we wanted to expand it to this advisory board to also look at doula, and pregnancy support professions. We really want to dig a little deeper in understanding what the educational and training qualifications are, what appropriate regulation of professions, including licensure, certification, or registration, best practices for coordinated care, and improve patient outcomes. I'll remind you again, this is just an advisory board. With that, I would ask you for your support for Senate Bill 252.
First discussion on the bill, Dr. Fleming, speak on the bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, $850, $900, that's how much a physician or care provider loses when a patient doesn't come or is unable to come back for her second visit to get an implant. Now, if the physician could stock this so that when the patient initially comes in, it could be provided, that would be terrific. But you can't stock something that you think 3 months later, you're not going to be able to recoup that cost. So this just makes sense. It's one more way to help women have babies when they want to have babies, ultimately to help moms and babies be healthier and make an impact in our infant and maternal mortality and morbidity. So I urge you to support it. Thank you.
Further discussion on the bill? Chair sees none. The author is right to close. She waives the questions on file pass to the bill. All those in favor will, when the machine is up, and vote aye. Those opposed vote no. Of all the members voted, the title of the roll. Roll call shows 88 ayes, 8 noes. The bill has passed. The title of the bill remains the title of the act. Clerk shall inform the Senate of the passage of the bill. Senate Bill 268, Representative Judy. Chair hands down on final passage, Senate Bill 268.
Senate Bill 268, a bill for enactment in the Indiana Code.
Chair recognizes Representative Judy to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the General Assembly. First of all, I'd like to thank my co-authors, Representative Jeter, Representative Carbaugh, and Representative VanNatter. This bill passed out of Senate 49-0, passed out of Pension and Labor 12-0, and passed out of Ways and Means 23-0. This bill is a bipartisan bill. I'd like to paint you a little picture right now about our geopolitical landscape we are residing in. This is the FBI Federal Bureau of Investigation's China, the Risk of Corporate in America, 2019. The annual cost to U.S. economy of counterfeit goods, pirated software, and theft of trade secrets is between $225 billion and $600 billion annually in the United States. China's technology development strategy, and I quote, China's strategic goals include becoming a comprehensive national power, creating innovation, driven economic growth, and modernizing its military. It aspires to equal or suppress the United States as a global superpower and influence the world with a value system shaped by under-democratic, authoritarian ideals, using a whole-of-society approach to achieve these goals. China takes advantage of every opportunity, from joint ventures to economic espionage, to develop and maintain a strategic economic edge. To achieve its strategic goals, China relies on state-directed plans which provide insight into the kinds of intellectual property and trade secrets the country targets and seeks to acquire from foreign sources. These plans govern foreign acquisition in science and technology, and their scale of influence is ever impressive. Right here is their China strategic goals. This is from the FBI in 2019. 2022 U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission annual report to Congress. They talk about China's cyber capabilities, warfare, espionage, and implications for the United States. And I quote, China's cyber operations pose a serious threat to the U.S. government, business, and critical infrastructure network in the new and highly competitive cyber domain. As we've just seen, Iran, Saudi Arabia envoys meet in China in restoration of diplomatic ties. That's happened in Beijing, not Washington, D.C. Just recently, we had a Chinese spy balloon gathering intelligence from sensitive U.S. military sites, despite U.S. efforts to block it. Question is, what sites here in Indiana have they collected and what data that is? China has given huge loans to countries and now spending billions to bail them out. They're going around and handing out loans to these third world countries and then controlling their natural resources. They are not our ally. And lastly, BRICS, common currency soon. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They have now created this global partnership where they're moving away from the dollar. They're looking into possibly a digital-based currency, central bank. They're moving. There's an economic war against our monetary policy happening and evolving in front of our eyes. So what this bill does is it says over the next 5 years, we're going to divest our pensions, our state pensions, away from Chinese companies. Within the first 3 years, it has to be 50%. In year 4, 75%. In year 5, 100%. So with that, and looking at what this looks like, what we're looking at for the future, I think this is a way that the states can fight back against China. We will be divesting approximately $1 billion of away from Chinese companies over the next 5 years. So with that, I ask for your support.
Further discussion on the bill? Chair sees none. The authorized right to close. He waives it. Questions on file pass to the bill. All those in favor will, when the machine is open, vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. While the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 96 ayes, 0 noes. The bill has passed. Shall I tally the bill remain the title of the act? Clerk shall inform the Senate of the passage of the bill. Senate Bill 275, Representative Zent. Chair hands down on final passage Senate Bill 275.
Senate Bill 275, a bill for enactment in the Indiana Code.
Chair recognizes Representative Zent to speak on the bill.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, Senate Bill 275, authored by Senator Dr. Johnson, updates Senate Bill 239 from last year, adding a few additional terms to the definition of the medical practice. In the House, in our committee, we added language to make a small update to the Athletic Trainers Practice Act. This change does not alter what athletic trainers can do today, simply brings their code into alignment with today's practice and licensure standards. This is done after consultation with state medical, chiropractors, and PTs, and they're all in agreement with the language that we've come up with. And additionally, it deals with pharmacy immunization. 3 states, Indiana being one of those, have a list of vaccines that pharmacists may administer. The other 47 have broader language and have gone away from using a set list. Currently in Indiana, doctors' offices, both physicians and dentists, utilize state health commissioners' recommendations, and this change would allow pharmacists and certified pharmaceutical techs to do the same. This quite clearly will improve access to care, especially in underserved areas, and lower the cost of health care. I'd like to thank Health Committee Chairman Dr. Barrett for hearing this bill. It unanimously passed out of committee. I'd like to thank my co-sponsors, Representative King, Representative Heaton, and Dr. Fleming. I ask for your support. Thank you.
First discussion on the bill. Chair sees none. The author has the right to close. He waives it. Questions on final pass to the bill. All those in favor will. Machines open, vote aye. Those opposed, vote no. While the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 95 ayes, 0 noes, 96 ayes, 0 noes. The bill has passed. Shall I tally the bill remain the title of the act? Clerk shall inform the Senate of the passage of the bill. Senate Bill 283, Representative Behning. Chair hands down on final passage Senate Bill 283.
Senate Bill 283, a bill for enactment in the Indiana.
Chair recognizes Representative Behning. Speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Senate Bill 283 is a bill about Marion County road funding. When Marion County became a consolidated city, motor vehicle funds were distributed by population, and the population was determined by what was the old Indianapolis Fire Department Fire District, which was the old city limits. Over the last 3 or 4 decades, we have had a number of our townships that were outside the fire district have consolidated with those with IFD, and the auditor of the state has adjusted the population based on the fact that they're now part of IFD and comply with state law. We do have 3 townships in Marion County that are not a part of IFD. They are Pike, Wayne, and Decatur. And currently, they are not counted in this formula. So the city of Indianapolis, the county, loses approximately $8 million annually because those citizens are not getting counted. The money does not go to the townships. It does not go to the county. What this bill does is it adds, for purposes of counting for distribution, those 3 townships are included. It also requires that the city match that with 100% a match in non-public safety appropriated revenue. It also has a restriction on the use of those funds, that it has to be used for restricted motor vehicle counts, which means it has to be spent on road service. And then the Transportation Committee put in a Section 2 that says that the Indiana Department of Transportation shall do the following. Number 1, conduct a study of, with advisement from the consolidated city, determine the road condition of the consolidated city's former state highways. All the state highways inside 465 are now under the operation of Indianapolis, and this would, they would do it, NDOT will do a study of those. They also have to appear at the interim study committee to give a report on that, and then not later than November 1st, submit a report to the study committee on roads and transportation. It's really an issue of parity. I want to thank my co-sponsors, Representative Shackleford, Representative Hamilton, and Representative Pressel for hearing the bill. We'd appreciate your support.
First discussion on the bill. Chair hears none, sees none. Author has the right to close the waiver. Questions on file pass to the bill. All those in favor will, when the sheet's up, will vote aye. Those opposed vote no. Representative VanNatter, would you like to vote? While the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 97 ayes, 1 no. The bill has passed. Shall the title of the bill remain the title of the act? Clerk shall have 4 and Senate pass to the bill. Senate Bill 325, Representative Thompson. Chair hands down on final passage Senate Bill 325.
Senate Bill 325, a bill for enactment. The
Chair recognizes Representative Thompson to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Senate Bill 325 is the bill that deals with the Shifley case. And as you know, in that case, it was basically ruled that the homestead is pretty open in terms of all the property and structures around their respective home. And so what 325 does, it tries to put some kind of a limit, if you will, on that. And so what it will be now, if we adopt this, would be, of course, the home, and then a garage, detached or unattached, either one. One additional building that is used predominantly for home or residential purposes, and then one additional yard structure that is not a pool or a deck or gazebo or patio. All of those respective items are already going to be included as part of the homestead, regardless of attached or unattached. And what is really surprising is you might think, well, that's a huge expansion. If you go to the fiscal note, you'll see about $17 billion, not billion, $1 million, got 3 zeros off there, didn't I? $1 million. And that's a little over 2% of the increase in the levy, total levy this year. That would be the effect. And I contend the reason why is because most of these types of properties will be in unincorporated areas. And most parts of that state, or the state, where you have that is under a $2 rate. And so it also, I didn't mention, moves back all the other property on that homestead, or on that residential property, will now be at 2%. The Constitution says for other residential property, it's 2%. And so we match that up with the Constitution. And so with that, I'd welcome any questions. Thank you.
First discussion on the bill. Chair sees none. The author has the right to close the waiver. Questions on file pass to the bill. All those in favor will, when the machines will vote aye. Those opposed vote no. Representative Tad. Have all the members voted? Tally the roll. Roll call says 97 ayes, 1 no. The bill has passed. Title bill, meaning title of the act. Clerk shall inform the Senate pass of the bill. Senate Bill 327, Representative Thompson. Chair, hands down. Senate Bill 327 on final passage.
Senate Bill 327, a bill for enactment in the Indiana Code concerning it.
Chair recognizes Representative Thompson to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Senate Bill 327, of course, you would have seen the bill on the calendar at different times in the committee. And in my mind, it's went through a interesting process. Very first bill we heard in the second half, and it was a 3-hour hearing. We scheduled that bill for amend and vote a 3 weeks later, and we didn't call the bill that day in committee and just held the bill. And it didn't go on the calendar for the very last hearing last week on Tuesday. And I had some from the Gary delegation come and talk to me and said, you know, we really like to have this on the calendar. And the more we talked and the more I thought driving back and forth, I come to that conclusion that what they were proposing was the best solution. And I'll tell you why. All the discussion up to that point, my concern as I thought about it was going to be an us and a them with regard to that new school board. And as I thought about it, an us and a them just will have a tough time succeeding. It just will be a tough time. It had to be everybody together as an us. And so when the Gary delegation come to me and made a proposal, I thought, you know, this is maybe a change that some maybe goes a little bit too far to the edge. But I'm convinced that if it's going to be successful, it's got to be in us. And I know that the Gary delegation, some of them have, I would call, burned some capital, so to speak, in the fact that they're on the bill now. And I would ask them maybe to burn some more in the sense that the key will be, we're going to have 5 members, 1 from the city council, 1 from the mayor, 1 must be a resident of Gary, appointed by the state superintendent, 1 that must be a resident of Lake County, and then 1 any other place, both of those by the state superintendent. And so, but the key is to get the right people. And it may be someone we never thought of would be the right person on this school board. But I'm convinced the right 5 people that want to make this a success and want to make the future of the Gary School Corporation very positive will do it. And it only takes 1 or 2 that has the mindset, it's us and them, I'm concerned. And so I hope we get some of the best people possible across the state in some cases to serve there and hopefully bring this corporation back to a good place that's good for the students. It also has a provision and it deals with a lot of DUAB, a type of cleanup. That's also same provision stuck in 419. But so with that, I'd ask for your support that we can hopefully have Gary's Corporation back on the right path. Thank you.
For discussion on the bill, Representative Harris, speak on the bill. You have to yield, he yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chairman Thompson. As you said, this has been a long, interesting process, and we have made some some movement in the direction that those of us locally would like to see. I do have a couple of questions just for clarification. So you gave the makeup of the board.
Right.
And from previous conversations, we've talked about this. Is this the final makeup, or is there opportunity in the future for changing it?
Oh, I would never be, as long as I'm here, personally, opposed to looking at something different in the future. You never know how things will go. And I have a tough time saying never, because that's probably unwise with rare exceptions. And so I think it could possibly change at some point in the future. To what way, I'm not sure.
Okay. And that change would, again, involve us doing a legislative change here?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So conceivably, in the next year or 2, we could make a change on the board.
We could. I would contend probably the next 2 to 3 years are the key years.
Okay.
If this board is successful and moves forward, I think we'll probably make it. And if it's rough the first couple of years, it'll be difficult, to be honest. Not that it couldn't happen.
Okay, thank you. Permission to speak, please.
You're recognized, Representative Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the board, members of the board, members of the House, excuse me. I'm in school board mode, apparently. As we have as has been said here, this has been a long process. Those of us that are local to Northwest Indiana, to Gary, represent Gary, are ready for a move in the direction of having it come back to local control. We started on this actually my first year here as a member of this body. And so we've been working on, we've been pushing for, we've requested. This bill is a move in that direction. It's not 100% of what we want, but when you look at where we were and where we are now, it's something that, you know, we can look at and vote for. At least I feel like I can vote for it. I'm going to ask you to vote for it. We do like the fact that there are some local choices made. As mentioned, the mayor of the city received the choice, the council receives the choice. A third member has to be, there are 3 members that are selected by the Secretary of Education. One of those people has to be a Gary resident, and another one has to be a Gary or a Lake County person. So we're moving in the right direction in the sense of the 5 members, 3 of them will be Gary residents. Eventually, as Chairman Thompson said, looking at making some changes that we hopefully in the next 3 or so years can have this be 100% representation by people that live in the city of Gary and chosen by the city of Gary. And then I would like to offer also, I know that the Secretary of Education will be making some choices. We on the local front would be happy to help out with that process. So I would like to throw that out there as an option. And again, I will be voting yes for this and ask for your support. We need to move this bill forward so we can continue the process of returning local control to the city of Gary, the constituents of Gary, the people that live in the city of Gary. Thank you.
For discussion on the bill, Representative Hatcher, speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. I just got up here last week because of the amendment that was passed, and I just want to thank Chairman Thompson for all of his help and really listening to us and our concerns and the things that we kind of needed to get to too for the constituents and the residents, so we all feel like we have a voice in the process. I think this is a great first step, and I hope next year we'll be back to maybe talk about a timeline returning to local control. And also, I think that everyone that is named on that board will have a stake in the game. We're so glad we got a couple from, well, one from Gary, one from Lake County, and we're hoping that that third person will have real strong ties to the city, either be from there or still have family there or some kind of connection to our community. So I just want to again thank Chairman Thompson for his help and his work, and also Representative Smith and Representative Harris and Senator Melton from Gary on the other side. Thank you.
For discussion on the bill, Dr. Smith, speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. I do not know of any piece of legislation in my 33 years that I've devoted more hours of meeting, more man hours and communicating with my constituents, more man hours in negotiating through this legislative process. We've been meeting for more than a year with our colleagues that make the decisions here in the legislature. We came down, our entire delegation came down with marching orders or the desires of the community, and they were fully understood. We reduced their desires into a piece of legislation that wasn't moving anywhere, and we didn't expect it to move. We have done our utter best to deliver what our community wants. And to tell you the truth, we failed. And the result is what we have here, which is the bill that we're discussing now. But I want to thank Representative Thompson for his work that he has done on this bill. I believe that he has honestly listened to us. I think his heart is in the right place. We differ on some things, but I appreciate his willingness, his spirit that he's had as we've gone through this process. What the citizens wanted was an elected board, and we knew that was not going to happen, but it was the desires of the citizens. They wanted to a transitional plan, and we spelled that transitional plan out in the amendment that I offered last week, which did not fly. And they wanted also forgiveness of the debt that we owe to the Common School Fund. We have reduced that debt. But it was the thinking of the community, if we could start with a clean slate, we'll be more successful financially in operating the school corporation. Those things did not happen. I don't believe this is really a true form of local control. I think it's just a modified version of state control. But it's what's being offered. We do know what we don't want any more of MGT running our school corporation. And so if indeed this is what we have to take back home, I want to thank this legislature for being a little bit willing to compromise. Not give us all what we want, but you were willing to make some compromises. I would urge you to vote for this bill. I'll be transparent with you and let you know I'm not going to vote for it because I felt the community said something else. But I believe that we need to be freed from the level of state control that we have, and I would urge your support for this bill. I think that the work of the people who are in control certainly has been refreshing by what we've experienced most recently in working with Representative Thompson, and I do thank you.
First discussion on the bill. Chair sees none. The author has the right to close. Waives it? No.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Thank you for the kind words, but in the end, I believe where we've landed is the best possibility of success. I really believe that. And so with that, I would ask for your support, and my hope is this is the start of a process that we have great success both on the fiscal side and the education achievement side in Gary. Thank you.
Question is on the final pass of the bill. All those in favor, when machine is open, will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. While the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 94 ayes, 4 noes. The bill has passed. The title of the bill remains the title of the act. Clerk shall inform the Senate passes the bill. Senate Bill 391, Representative Behning. Chair hands down final passage, Senate Bill 391.
Senate Bill 391, a bill for enactment of the Indiana Code.
Chair recognizes Representative Behning. Speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Senate Bill 391 is a bill regarding charter schools. I want to give you a little bit of facts about charter schools. Charter schools are public schools, free, and they're open to all Hoosier students. Charter schools were created to allow schools to operate with more flexibility and less regulation in return for being held to stricter accountability frameworks. Charter schools have no geographic boundaries like traditional public school districts. There's over 120 charter schools today serving 51,122 students. That's approximately 4.3% of Indiana's student population. Today, Senate Bill 391 is coupled with House Bill 1001 in an effort to try to create some level of parity between these two different types of public schools. Reports indicate that charters receive, on average, less than $7,000 less per pupil than traditional public schools. House Bill 1001 provided additional funding for our charter schools. Senate Bill 391 attempts to take that another step. Senate Bill 391 requires that a traditional public school that is located within Lake, Vanderburgh, Marion, or St. Joe County, if they have an operating or school safety referendum, they are to share a pro rata share of the proceeds of that referendum with the charter schools that choose to participate that are located, that have students in their charter school. Those charter schools also are required to provide a pro rata share of the marketing expenses, so they're sharing in the efforts to help raise the resources for the school and for the students. We accepted an amendment on Thursday that created more transparency, requiring all salaries for traditional public schools as well as charter schools to be made available on their charter school and public school websites. We also put language in the bill that deals with, creates charter school facility grant program, which is be administered by Indiana Department of Education and the State Board of Education. That amount is capped at $500 or whatever is appropriated in the House budget. It ends up, those charters must submit to the State Board of Education a budget plan with how they will use detailed use of expenses as well as a facility master plan. And these funds could only be used for facilities, lease payments, et cetera. The bill also increases the cap on the length of time of a charter. Current law says a charter is no more than 7 years. We extended that to 15, which better enables charter to deal with financing when they're financing a facility. It allows charters to access the bond bank. It allows all charters to accept the bond bank. Currently, all charters are allowed to accept Indiana Bond Bank except for those that are chartered by the Mayor of Indianapolis, and this would allow for all of them to have access to the bond bank. It also would allow charter schools to borrow from the Common School Fund, just as traditional public schools borrow from the Common School Fund. The bill also has language that tweaks the dollar law. Most of the tweaks that came over from the Senate are still included, and they include things on usage and how those, if a building drops below 60% of usage, when and if the dollar law will come into place. They are all optional. They are not a shall. It's actually may impact the schools. And lastly, we put language in that when a school district shares a pro rata share of their operating school safety referendum, the dollar law will no longer apply in that school district because of their sharing. With that, Mr. Speaker, I would appreciate everyone's support. Thank you.
For discussion on the bill, Representative Klinker, speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this is very important because it's very difficult to pass a referendum. Many of you in here have tried to pass many referenda and have not been successful, and you know what you go through to do it. I think that we need to think very, very long and hard about sharing that with charter schools. We happen in our area to have 2 charter schools that failed. And the money, of course, as a public school, did not go back to the school corporation. So we have to think, I think, very carefully about sharing the referendum money, and the charter schools, with transparency, which we appreciate, ought to be responsible for helping to pass the referendum, and also responsible for where the money is going. And I appreciate the fact that you are asking for accountability on what the folks are making in charter schools, because we know in certain charter schools, the administrators and other folks are not accountable or are not sharing what their dollars, where they are being spent and how much they're making. So it's very important, I think, to discuss the charter school situation and look at the areas. And I know this is 4 places in the state, but that means that we're probably looking at other places in the state for sharing charter school referendum money. So I would like to make sure that there is transparency and that the charter school folks are part of the process that is very difficult to pass a referendum. Thank you.
For discussion on the bill, Representative DeLaney, speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this bill is, in my mind, a critical breach of a covenant between this body and the people of this state. The covenant arose in the early part of this century when the legislature said that it would take over, meaning the state would take over, a more substantial role in funding our public schools. And to do that, we did, among other things, we increased the sales tax and so on. We tried to reduce the reliance on property tax. That was the whole genius of the early 21st century tax reform in this state. We're breaking that covenant, we're backing up, and we're changing that. We're putting a strain on our property tax and on our traditional public schools. If you look at your tax bill, as I have, I assume that in most cases, the largest single recipient of property taxes in your county will be the schools. That seems to be the standard pattern. And what we're going to do is do two things, basically, to the financing of our public schools, our traditional public schools. First of all, we're going to require that the dollar law continue, and there's been some misunderstanding on that. The dollar law is not being expired under this. It will apply in all counties so that buildings which are no longer fully needed by school districts will be turned over for as little as $1 to a charter school. That takes property tax assets created by property tax collected over time, whether through a referendum or through the standard property tax. Those buildings were acquired by the public. And by the way, they acquired those buildings through a vote of a democratically elected school board. Not true under the dollar law. A non-democratically, non-elected charter school board can compel the transfer to it of public property. So that's an attack on the capital side or the asset side of the covenant we had designed to reduce the reliance on property tax. The second one is the referenda. We're going to have referenda where people who are not under school board control get the revenue. Think about that. In terms of conventional democratic theory, that makes little sense. So our school boards will be required, if they want a referendum, they will be required to share the assets with any charter school that wants it and that's got the proper location. That's not an option for the school board. So the price of your referendum is increased. Of course, that presumably would mean that more money will be required because we have to share it among more people, including people who are not subject to the controls of the school board. So you're going to give money to people who are not under your control. This is really a novel idea. This has nothing to do with the understanding we gave our taxpayers 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that the state would increase its responsibility. That's a rather dramatic change. And of course, it's literally undemocratic. People who are not supervised, not controlled, get to share in the profits. We wouldn't do that to our police departments, would we? Why don't we tell the city council that part of their salary increase should go to somebody running a civic organization? What is the limit of this theory? Okay, we're walking away from this covenant because we have a new loyalty. We have a new loyalty to what I call, they used to have this great term, the military-industrial complex. We now have the charter school complex. And in defending the bill, nothing was said about the true financial status of these institutions. They receive millions of dollars from not-for-profits. Can I repeat that? Millions of dollars from not-for-profits that support charter schools and support so-called education reform. That's not true of our public schools. So we literally have very little idea of what the, quote, needs are of the charter schools. What we know is what the wants of the charter school lobbyists are. What we know is what the wants of the people who found a charter school and name it after themselves. We know what their wants are, but we don't know their needs. This is a problem in accounting. What are they using the money for? Do they really even have a need? I will not go into all the details of this bill because, as was alluded to by Representative Behning, there are other assets being given. State loans, other loans, capital grants. So money will be pouring in to the charter school complex from multiple directions if we pass this bill. Now, there's one other really unique component. By the way, we're talking about approximately $24 million cost to the charter schools in 4 counties if referendum were passed. 4 counties are in a special category. 92 counties, you have to give your school away for $1. In 4 counties, you have to give your referendum away. Now, 4 counties. What counties would you pick? Apparently, counties which have Democratic control have different economic needs. Apparently, the counties that have Democratic control, they have to just suck it up and give their money away in a referendum to somebody else. 88 counties don't have that problem. I'm not allowed to ask the people from those 88 counties not to vote. But how would you react if 88 counties selected 4 of your counties to stick with a special law, an anti-democratic law? We have something in our Constitution talking about special legislation. My understanding of that historically is that special legislation was viewed as legislation that was designed to feather the nest of a particular community or county, give them a break, help them out in ways you didn't help the others. This is a new style of special legislation. What's special is the negative. What's special is the attack on some places. That's what's special. I think our courts are going to take a look at that. Now, I mentioned that those 4 counties are heavily Democratic, and I might as well mention the other point. Where are our minority populations in this state? Is it a coincidence that they're in those counties? I think not. You know, I'm not a judge, never wanted to be a judge. But if I were, and this matter were brought before me, I would take a long, hard look. Why are the places with heavy minority populations getting a special regime? Why do they have to share their referendum property taxes in a way that others don't? I'm sure there's an explanation, but it hasn't been offered here. So, this is a sad moment in my view for public education, a sad moment for democracy in our elected school boards, a sad moment for financing our public schools, a sad moment for the people who paid their property tax for a building that now will be given away, a sad moment for those places where people who have strong views about charter schools will vote against a referendum, even though they might think that their traditional public schools need the money. There are people who will not want to share the money with an unelected, uncontrolled, outside complex made up of lobby groups, out-of-state fundraisers, donors, ideologues, and so forth. I ask you to vote against this bill. I'm in fear the Senate will have its own game. They've got a whole different game, and we're going to have to go through this again. We should not do this to the 4 counties in question. If you don't have an explanation for it, if you can't tell our minority voters, if you can't tell our Democratic voters why we're special in a negative way, then put your finger on the red button. Thank you.
Further discussion on the bill? Representative Pack speak on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Author yield, he yields.
Thank you. Representative Behning, would you please remind us all how we selected these, or how you all selected these 4 counties? What went into this decision?
Basically, it's where most of the charters are located.
And how many counties have charter schools?
I think there's a total of 19.
Okay. I thought it was a few more than that, but I can't be sure, so I'm going to take your word for that now. So those locations, those counties where most of the charter schools are, would you agree that they're mostly kids of color? Honestly.
Where they have, if you want data, I'm happy. In fact, in my closing remarks, I'll share the data about the impact for charter schools have on kids of color, the positive impact. If you want that data, I can share it now.
Thank you. And also those townships, thank you, Representative Behning. Those townships, that's it. I'll take that, though, later. Thank you.
Representative Pack, would you like to speak?
Would I?
Sure.
Is it okay if I
Yeah,
speak?
no, sure. You're recognized, Representative Pack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To say the very least, this is not an equitable piece of legislation, and it doesn't take much thought to figure that out. And I strongly believe that as a body, as a legislative body, it is our duty to be equitable. I just got a text message from Superintendent of Speedway Schools, which is a district in my constituency. He said, Renee, this is so bad. Because see, in May, they're going to have for the very first time a referendum on their ballot. And the people of Speedway, the educators, we've even come over and helped a few of us from Wayne to help them get the word out that we would love to have a yes vote on May 2nd. Not one charter school representative has ever showed up at a meeting. I've never gone door to door and met up with any charter school educators, but yet they want a piece of that money. They want a piece of the pie that they haven't done anything to earn. And I think it's wrong. You can't keep taking and taking and taking and not accounting for anything. That is totally, totally what we are not about. I have never accepted a loan for my business or for myself without bank statements, reports on my assets, credit worthiness. But here in this House, we're asking for us to vote to hand over money to schools that don't even have to do any of this. This is not how we should operate in education. If you want a referendum, you need to do the work. If you want a referendum for your schools, you need to get out there and pound the pavement like the rest of us have been doing. And I was on the PAC for 2015 and for 2019. We worked ourselves really hard. Let's do the right thing. Public schools, traditional public schools are not just out there sitting on tons of money. And what we do have, we work for. What we do have, we've been wonderful stewards with. Maybe the other charter schools are not. I don't know. I can't say. But it's time for us to stand up for our traditional public schools and say, no, you've worked for it. You keep it. You educate your kids. And if you're from another entity, you all work for it. You take care of your kids. I think that's what's equitable, and that's what's fair, and that's what we have to show Hoosiers that we do. We are fair, and we are equitable, and we hear you. Thank you very much.
Further discussion on the bill. Representative Dr. Smith, speak on the bill. The author yield, he yields.
I have someone's phone. Renee? Representative Behning, you were asked a question about the 4 counties that you have included in this legislation, and you indicated you chose them because they have the most quantity of charter schools there?
Yes, for instance, Indianapolis by far Indianapolis Public Schools had more of the kids that are located within an attendance zone of IPS attend a school outside of the Indianapolis Public Schools. So they either attend a charter, voucher, or another public schools. Obviously in Gary, Lake County, clearly there is a significant number of charters, St. Joe County. Basically those counties have pretty significant preponderance of charters located within those districts.
Okay, I accept that data. Did you consider the fact that these are Democratic areas?
No, it's where the charters are and where the most of the charters are located, so had nothing to do with political makeup of the...
Did you consider that these are major minority counties?
Well, as you know, charters, and you know very well, I think, in Gary, that charters serve a significant number of significant number of minority kids. The data is clear in terms of performance for charters, even for minorities. Credo, for instance, has done a lot of research that I can share with you showing how much success kids of color have in charter schools. But no, that was not taken into consideration.
Okay, but you know there's considerable data that shows that there's been less academic performance by African American children and Hispanic children that are operated by charters than the traditional public schools.
I'm sure you can find a study to do anything you want if you work hard enough on it.
Okay. Why are you sunsetting the $1 provision? That was your brainchild. Why are you sunsetting?
Remember, in Ways and Means, the $1 law was put back into the bill. So it's only sunset if a traditional public school is sharing a pro rata share of their referendum dollars. At that point in time, it would sunset for the public school that's having that's sharing the referendum dollars.
Okay, what is your feeling on the fact that sometimes charter schools are not as successful as they think they are going to be, and they end up closing, and they required a building for $1? What do you think should happen with that building?
It depends. Actually, if you look at the bill, in this particular case, Senator Rogers had actually put language in that would say it goes back to the school district in some cases. If there's building liability or some sort of loan against it, other things might happen, but it definitely, in fact, this bill right now would actually say that if they do close, there's a lot of requirements in there that if it closes, it has to go back. If they fail to use it within 2 years, it goes back to the traditional public schools. There are some of those provisions in this bill, as well as more transparency provisions.
Okay, why did you oppose then the legislation or the amendment that I offered to this bill, indicating that that the property, when it's no longer used, would return back to the school corporation?
Well, it was already in the bill, and it's in section 18, page 24, line 42, page 25. Lines 1 through 42 provides a covered school building is sold to a charter school or state education institution, and the charter school or state education no longer intends to use the school building, they shall offer the transfer back to the school building. So it's back to the traditional public school. So they're returning it to the traditional public schools. Also provisions in there, like I said, if a charter, in that section, if a charter school or state educational institution purchases a school building, do not use it for academic purposes within 2 years, the building shall revert to the school corporation, which may sell or dispose of the building.
You are very knowledgeable, and I really admire your knowledge that you have in the field of education. Any entity only has 3 kinds of resources. They have financial resources, they have human resources, and they have physical resources. In dealing with the referendum situation, you addressed the financial resources. You said that the charters shall bear a portion equitable portion of the finances for a referendum. But dollars are not the only thing that causes referenda to be successful. And I've worked on 3 different campaigns, and we were successful the last time. And our selling point was that that might be a way that we can get our school corporation returned back to local control. But in working with those, I put in inordinate hours of putting out yard signs myself, maybe 400 or 500 I put out myself. We did radio appearances. We appeared in churches and spoke in behalf of the referendum. We went to large centers and passed out literature. Human resources are required to get a public question passed. Why didn't you not address the human resource portion? Because the money by itself is not going to make that referendum successful. It takes a whole lot of human manpower. Why haven't you said in the bill that the charters needed to share in the recruitment, but in the campaign, the actual campaign to win voters over to their side?
Well, first off, I would suggest that a charter school is in their interest as well for the referendum to be successful. So, we do require them to share in marketing, a pro rata share. So they are having to pay whatever the traditional public schools. I think the one issue became it's very difficult for traditional public schools to say, I'm going to expend X number of volunteer hours. But I'm not opposed if you could come up with a way where, the charter has to, expend, but who's going to measure it? And I think it becomes very, very difficult to define, which is why I didn't include it. But clearly, the dollar amount is very easily defined. And like I said, it's in the charter school's best interest for that referendum to be successful.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Representative Behning. Permission to speak?
You're recognized, Dr. Smith.
Yes, charter schools initially were supposed to be the great experiment. I think we limited it to 25 charter schools across the state. And the thought behind that, which I was opposed to and didn't agree with, but the thought behind it was that we would find what these charter schools were doing that were successful, and we would replicate it in the traditional public schools. That has never happened. There has never even been a thrust to make that happen. That seems to be forgotten, which was a major argument for the charter school provision in our code. And our charter schools, I have not studied them all over the state, but I know in my area, and I do study and I do compare, our charter schools have not been successful. They have performed lower than our traditional schools. In addition to that, the 5 years we've been under the dominance of MGT, our academic scores for our children have plummeted to a degree that's embarrassing. It's almost inhumane what we're doing with our children in that area. But even with that poor delivery process under MGT, our traditional schools still outperformed the charter schools. So this great experiment, this panacea, this cure-all has not worked. The proof is in the pudding. It has not worked. And what we're doing is we've seen the inequity that's been given in the justification for it. We said the reason why we're going to forgive the charter schools their common school fund debt is because they're not getting the property taxes. Now what we're doing now, we're coming back and saying you can have access to the property taxes now. And then we said, well, because they're not getting this, that, and that, we're going to give them additional money, additional funding. And there's no accountability. The one good thing is that we have a piece of legislation going through right now which at least requires that we have some transparency with these charter schools. These charter schools have boards with members who never come to the local community where people have access to them. And when they've tried to reach them in their ivory towers, they don't get any responses. This has to stop because this is an experiment on children living in poverty and children of color. And it needs to end. It needs to sunset right away. And I'm dismayed to find out the change was made in the Ways and Means Committee to eliminate the sunset of this dollar provision. It is unfair. These are tax dollars that are being utilized in the form of a building to educate people by people who don't live in our communities, who have no connection to our communities, who we don't really know even care about our communities. And they're able to participate through the internet or through Skype or through any of the Zoom, any of the processes that we use now for meetings. It is unfair to the communities what we're doing here. And now you're saying that they're entitled now to even some of your referendum monies. I don't believe that many communities are going to buy into this process. And so I tried to force my colleague, whom I respect, to say what he said in our committee, that he found out that the dollar provision doesn't work. If it doesn't work, why are we continuing on with it? It is a fool that keeps going down the same path. I'm not calling him a fool, so don't raise that up. I'm not calling him a fool. I'm making an analogy. It's a fool that keeps going down the same path, and you know that there's failure there. That's what we call insanity, repeating it, doing the same thing over and over again to get the same results. And so we've had these poor results, and we're continuing down that avenue. I think it's unfair for the community to have to give up a building to a private entity for $1. These are multi-million-dollar buildings. And the argument was made in the committee that these buildings are normally in poor repair, and these charter schools are putting so many dollars into them. And so that's why they ought to keep them or have access to dispose of them in the way that they want to. Well, let me just tell you, Gary had a whole lot of buildings. When I first started in school corporation as a teacher, we had 48,000 students and 40 buildings. Okay? Most of those buildings were empty. And we got 10, 11, 12 charters in our school, per capita, too many. And none of them requested any of those buildings because they were not in good condition. They didn't want them. What they want are the buildings that are in good condition. They're not accepting anything that's going to be a financial burden to them. And so if they accept it, maybe not the cream of the crop, but some of the cream, then they ought to give it back to the school corporation at least. And they ought to pay the fair market value for those buildings because it's tax dollars. And then let me get to the referendum issue. It takes manpower to get these provisions passed, to get these referenda passed. It takes hours and hours and hours. I can't tell you how much we met. I can't tell you how many Saturdays I was out with crews trying to get the point across. I don't know, can't tell you how many churches I was assigned to go and speak and use my influence to get them to vote for the referendum. I was criticized greatly for supporting the referendum by the opposition. They said that I was getting all this money for being a consultant. I don't know where the checks went because I didn't get them and I didn't cash them. And I didn't know that they existed. But I put in the time. And I wasn't the only one. There were a lot of persons in the community out there, ministers and everybody, supporting the referendum in Gary. And you say all you need to do is, okay, it's going to cost $50,000 for our marketing. You just give your portion. That's not, it's not going to pass. At the university, I teach referendums called a public question. And I teach how you get those passed. And you have to do the same kinds of things that we do when we're campaigning for re-election and when we campaigned the first time to get elected. You got to go knock on doors. You got to appear on radio programs. You got to do all the things that I've outlined for you thus far. And so, I am emphatically opposed to this bill. I think it's a continuation of the inequity that we've had in legislation. It is unfair to certain communities of color in children, communities where we got children living in poverty. And then you're going to take the resources away from a community struggling. I'll give you an example, Gary. Our collection rate is poor because we got a lot of people living in indigent homes. And then you're going to, and our tax rate is high compared to the rest of the state. And you're going to take some of our jewels and give it away. It's not fair. And I know you're not listening to me, but I got to represent my constituents. And so if I must talk to the walls, maybe at least my constituents know that I'm doing that. Sometimes I'm hoping that your heart will be penetrated and you will understand what you're doing. We've created division in our public school process. It's not good. And this thrust is going to destroy publication. I imagine there's some people who want that. I look back historically and understand that public education or education in this country was not meant for the poor people anyway. We only came upon public education for the process of enculturating all the people who came here. We had this great statue out there which I admire, and I go see it quite often when I go to New York. It said, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses learning to be free, send these." And they came. And we needed to enculturate them. We need to get them to change some of their habits and their allegiance to other countries. As a consequence, we created traditional public schools, and they've worked. That's the one thing that's made us different from all other nations, because we provided education for all of our constituencies, all of our citizens. And we were pushing for quality instruction. And we created this big cloud that we were not succeeding with education in this country. That's the biggest lie that we ever told, because we started comparing apples to oranges. Our country mandates kids to go to school. Other countries do not. It's only the select few who get to move up. Their tests to move from one level to the next. And we're destroying something that's good. With all this thrust, you got to know the rest of the story. People are trying to get whole. Education is the last pot of money that businessmen haven't gotten a chance to get their hands on. And now they got their hands on it. And through the movement that's occurring, this is moving across the country, they're getting more and more. The first thing they went after was our textbooks. Textbooks, we had the same textbook for almost 100 years in this country until businessmen said we can make money off of textbooks. And then that wasn't enough. They said we want to get access to those dollars that have been used for education as well. And so we come up with all these creative programs. And we don't hold them accountable. Look at the number of kids who are in voucher programs, and they're not taking the I Learn test. They're not being held accountable. We don't know what they're doing with our kids. And unfortunately, they're kids of color, kids living in poverty. And you say you're concerned, but I don't think you're concerned. I know if you love me by your actions. I don't want to take your Sunday school, but I was there yesterday. And a question was asked of Peter. Lovest thou me, Peter? He said, yea, Lord. He said, feed my sheep. In other words, what he's saying is, show it me. Give me some proof. These charter schools are not giving us proof that you care, because you're not interested in the data. You're interested in funneling money to those who already have, making the have-nots lesser and the haves greater. I urge you to vote no against this bill.
First discussion on the bill. Chair sees none. The author has the right to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. There's been a lot said today in regards to charter schools. Let me give you a little bit of information. This document right here, multi-page document, is what Ball State requires for a charter school renewal application. There's a lot of accountability built into this system. They clearly, charters have a set period of time. If they fail to meet the needs of students, Ball State and all the other authorizers have pulled numerous charges, and so we're not going to continue this program moving forward. You talk about financial accountability. This is what the State Board of Accounts requires charters to do. State charters are required to have private examiners, GAAP accounting, as well as fund accounting through State Board of Accounts. Clearly, there's plenty of transparency. Not all of our traditional public schools have elected boards. You know, several of us have talked over time about the number of appointed boards we have. They have appointed boards, clearly appointed, but they're always not for profit, and they are accountable to the charter authorizers, as to the taxpayers, and ultimately to the parents who've made the decision to put their kids in these schools. 51,122 students across the state. Now, let's talk about academics and what's good for kids. A study recently conducted by Trine University found that a majority of the time, charter schools outperform their traditional public school counterparts. Charter schools outgrow their traditional public school counterparts, and minority, special ed, and low-income students in charter school achieve more academically than their traditional public school counterparts. In 2022, Stanford University Center for Research and Education Outcomes, CREDO, I would say Stanford is not a bastion of conservatism, found Indianapolis charter school students achieve more growth in math and English than their peers in traditional public schools across the state, and even further outperformed their peers. Indianapolis charter school students achieved 12 days of additional learning in English, 47 days of additional learning in math compared to students across the state. Black students, Indianapolis charter school students achieved growth equivalent to 86 days of additional learning in English and 144 days of additional learning in math. And the last thing I'll bring up, Signature School, a public charter school in Evansville, is consistently ranked due to their student performance. Most recently, the school was ranked third nationally and first in the nation in terms of best high schools by U.S. News and World Report. What we're asking for in this bill is to provide parity. These parents have decided to put their kids in these schools, and we're just asking the dollars follow the students. Support school choice and support these parents. I appreciate your support of 391.
Question is on. What's that? Yeah, I'm saying. Question is on final passage of the bill. All those in favor will, when the machine's open, vote aye. Those opposed, vote no. Pursuant to House Rule 47, Representative Jeter is excused from voting on the question of Senate Bill 391. Pursuant to House Rule 46 is the reason. Have all the members voted? Tally the roll. Roll call says 64 ayes, 33 noes. The bill has passed. Shall the title bill remain the title of the act? Clerk shall inform the Senate pass to the bill. Senate Bill 419, Representative Thompson. Chair hands down on final passage, Senate Bill 419.
Senate Bill 419, a bill for enactment of the...
The chair recognizes Chairman Thompson to speak on the bill.
Thank you. Excuse me, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Senate Bill 419 is the Department of Revenue bill. And one thing that DR asked to do was to, in most cases, was to couple with federal code, which does make it easier with regard to for Indiana taxpayers. There are a few exceptions. Lots of clarifying language in the bill. In several different parts, they've asked to clarify some language. Some of those are in the coupling process. Some of them I'll mention here in going through at least parts of the bill. There are some broadband exemptions for grants with regard to income tax, some sales tax suppression devices. That was added in committee, and it puts that back and it makes a crime for that and corresponds to the appropriate level. We did that actually on second reading. It allows a deduction for health care sharing accounts. but it does not include the portion you actually pay yourself. The goal is to pair that up to be equal with insurance. There's also a provision in there, if the feds were to change their policies, then Indiana would, of course, at that point, and make it deductible at the federal level, Indiana's would become void at that point. Changes the ABLE account to match up with the feds, goes from age 26 to 46 with regard to a disability when it must first occur. Does some things for Farm Bureau with regard to nonprofit health insurance that we passed a couple years ago. Allows a person that is employed in the state for up to 30 days or less to be exempt from Indiana income tax. Doesn't include professional athletes. And this is a provision that would encourage the folks to come here and work for short periods of time that need to. Has a provision that allows a tax credit for disabled or employers that hire disabled people. And I know Representative Green talked to me several times about this, and I'm convinced that's a good provision to help employers make that step to get those with disabilities employed. I contend a lot of times they can be great employees. Has a provision that allows for a current TIF, and you want to form a fire territory, that because of the increase and likely increase in the rate, that amount of increase in revenue would go to the fire territory and not to the TIF. Does it have a provision that protects those bonds if that money was needed? Shouldn't be needed because that increase in rate was never counted on happening. Has a provision in regard to compressed natural gas that's used as fuels. That's currently at a point not at the pump. And what's happening between the point where it's measured and at the pump, there's a loss. And so allows a person that sells this to claim a credit against that portion that they lose from the place it's measured to the pump. Codifies a provision that exempts sales, or for solar and wind, exempts sales tax on those provisions. That's just codifying current practice. Has a provision that allows a county council to take up to 0.05% of the public safety, strictly enabling, not required, and to use that for township fire, territories, or districts. A May provision, again. We've had some ongoing discussions with regard to local and township fire departments, and it's a topic I think needs to be explored further. This is a Band-Aid. It just allows us for 2 years, and we'll come back and hopefully find a more permanent solution. Requires a TIF to have a spending plan. Allows in that pass back of any funds, both capital and operating. Has a provision for the automatic refund back in 2021, the 125, to allow an application for that. It allows for a property tax amnesty relief program. I believe Representative Pryor had that provision. Has a sales tax exemption for breastfeeding equipment and supplies. Allows a 529 donation for the prior year up to the date the income taxes are due, typically the 15th of April. Want to be sure and emphasize, though, it does not exclude any type of clawbacks are still in place with regard, because another provision in that bill also allows some transfer to children with regard to a retirement account, but all the clawbacks will still apply. It allows for a historic tax credit administered by IEDC, and that expires or sunsets in 2030. It has a lit notification requirement with regard to a change in allocations for lit. It has that whole same provision at several pages of the fiscal and quality indicators that was in House Bill 327 is also just a clone of that in Senate Bill 3 or 419. It has successor liability language. It has some pass-through liability or pass-through entity cleanup from Senate Bill 2. And the last, it has a provision that extends for 2 more years the distribution between Carmel and fissures with regard to lit. And that just kind of emphasizes that the whole issue with regard to lit. In current law, if we didn't have this, it goes back to levy. And not a statement of judgment. Carmel has a large levy. The rate's really not that high, but a large levy, and the result of that and a distribution, it favors those entities a lot. I see in the county I reside too. Large levies result in large income tax distributions. So extends that so we don't use that provision for that distribution for 2 more years. And so with that, I think that's most of the parts. And of course, we'll welcome any questions. Thank you.
For discussion on the bill, Representative Frye, speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House. Chairman Thompson did a great job of explaining this bill. It's obviously a huge bill, has a lot of provisions in it. But the one I want to particularly speak to you about deals with the local option income tax for volunteer fire service and emergency medical services. Chairman Thompson, along with Representative Cherry, worked very hard on this amendment. They listened to us. We've been trying to find a solution for this for a number of years. As you know, the volunteer fire service continues to lose membership. And as they do, it puts more and more strain on those who are still there. Some departments are actually closing, which puts more strain on the departments around them. And so with this local option income tax, it allows from 0.01 to 0.05% to be used to fund the local volunteer fire department or EMS. If you're wondering how much money that is, I checked with Ways and Means. If you made $50,000 a year, 0.01 would be about $37 a year. That's less than $1 a week. I hope, because this is an option for our county councils, I hope they listen and I hope they pass this. Because if they don't, we're going to be coming back looking for far greater numbers of dollars when it comes to having to replace the volunteer fire service with career. So this is a great start, as Chairman Thompson said. We're not sure whether this is the actual fix, but it certainly is a real help. And I know the bill is going to go to a conference committee, I believe, and in there I would like to see another adjustment or two that will even help us more. But those of you who have volunteer fire service in your district and EMS, where our counties are struggling to fund them, this is a great opportunity for us to get back on track and provide great services to our citizens. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I thank you, and thank you, Chairman Thompson, for the work.
For discussion on the bill, Representative Green, speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. I'm not one to rush up to the microphone for DOR agency bills. However, within Senate Bill 419 is a provision that is deeply personal to me. In fact, it's the reason that I'm a member of this body here today. On page 99 of this bill, you'll find a brief section that addresses workforce development for the special needs community. You see, my son RG is autistic, and when the topic of his diagnosis comes up in conversation, I found that most people don't quite know what to say. It's an ironic juxtaposition of the disorder that's not lost on me because RG himself is actually quite verbal. In fact, if you were in the hallway on organization day, you would have seen RG approaching countless government affairs types to zealously explain the finer details of our State House statuary too. As my wife Erin and I mingled in the crowd that day, we recognized his voice even above the commotion exclaiming, "Hey, come see my friend Julia. You have to see my friend Julia." I'm not sure I've ever witnessed a purer form of innocence than to watch my son from across the hall interrupt Speaker Houston's wife to tug at her arm in conversation and demand that she follow him to the bronze bust of the late Congresswoman Julia Carson. On a day filled with lobbyists repeating the same policy points, making poor eye contact, and showing a limited understanding of nonverbal cues, I began to wonder who was really on the spectrum when it was the 6-year-old autistic boy who was rightfully more focused on the beauty of his surroundings. However, for those who do engage with me on my son's diagnosis, they invariably want to fixate on the origin story. When did he get diagnosed? How did you first come to suspect autism? And the ever-popular, what do you think causes it? People are probably surprised by how ambivalent my responses are. That's because most special needs parents don't dwell in the past, they dwell in the future. When you learn your child is on the spectrum, all the basic coordinates of your life are reoriented in an instant. You find yourself using different internal interrogatives, the which, where, and when that parents use to expectantly ponder which college will they attend, where will they settle, when will they marry, all get swapped for the more ominous who, how, and what. Who will take care of them? How will they support themselves? What will they do when I'm gone? For those familiar with Randy Lewis, a former Walgreens executive and national disability advocate, he puts it best when he shares that the secret hope of every special needs parent is to live just one day longer than their child. My purpose in running for office was to focus on what happens to children like RG after they age out of the therapies and interventions. That's because about 80% of people with a disability are unemployed in Indiana, while 85% of individuals on the spectrum are out of the workforce. It's an unconscionable statistic, and it's all the more unacceptable considering that we currently operate within an economic order that ostensibly holds diversity, equity, and inclusion as an article of faith on par with double entry accounting. Something obviously isn't working. In my short tenure here, workforce development has been a constant refrain. The questions I hear from employers and economic development officers alike border on the esoteric. Not just how do we find more people, but why doesn't anybody want to show up? Why are they opting out of the workforce? And a personal favorite I've heard, now that the CARES Act money is gone, how are they even supporting themselves? I'm less interested in such abstractions of the neurotypical. I'll let Harvard Business Review and Deloitte unpack the meaning of the Great Resignation, quiet quitting, rage applying, and whatever the next Reddit term is for generational workforce melodrama. I believe it's time we ask a different question. Who are we overlooking? Because we have a community of Hoosiers who are ready right now and are simply waiting for that opportunity. For too long, special Hoosiers have been the victims of a host of misconceptions. That hiring someone with a special need means additional risk, additional cost, missed days, or higher turnover. All have been proven false. Workplace studies repeatedly show special workers to be more productive, safer, have less turnover, and not surprisingly change workplace culture for the better. That shouldn't come as a surprise. After all, when one spends a lifetime fighting to get out from under the them pronoun and into the us, they tend to develop a deeper, more fully formed set of virtues. With Senate Bill 419 is a proposal that I poured myself into in my short time here. Section 43 will create a tax credit structure for small and medium-sized businesses that hire individuals, regardless of their disability, to do the same work for the same pay. It was designed to jumpstart a workforce development conversation between Hoosier employers and those with an IDD or physical disability. And it would be one of the most aggressive measures in the country at incentivizing the hiring of special Hoosiers who, right now, are aching for the opportunity, dignity, and independence that comes from meaningful work. I appreciate your time today and allowing me to share this with you, especially at a stage of session that values brevity. And I ask that you not only support this bill, that you would share this section with every employer you speak with when the topic of workforce development comes up back home. I've had the opportunity to speak about this issue many times over the last few months, and I've been asked what I hope comes out of this policy. The legislator in me, and in Chairman Thompson, hopes that this will have its desired effect and sunset in a few years for lack of need. However, if I was being honest, the father in me would say that I quietly fantasize of a day when a Harvard MBA with all the right internships, fraternities, and fellowships gets told in a job interview, sorry, we went with the autistic kid instead. Until then, I would ask for your support of this bill to ensure that more special Hoosiers have the dignity and independence obtained through meaningful work. Thank you.
Further discussion? Chair sees none. Representative Thompson rightfully chooses not to close. Question is on final pass of the bill. All those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. Well, the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 97 ayes, 1 no. The bill has passed. The title bill remain the title of the act. Clerk shall inform and send the passage of the bill. Do 3 quick House motions. House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House dissent from Senate amendments to engross House Bill 1006.
For the motion in a second. The motion. Is there a second? All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed no. Motion is adopted. House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House dissent from Senate amendments to engross House Bill 1021 and the Speaker appoint a committee to confer.
For the motion in a second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed no. Motion is adopted. House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House dissent from Senate amendments to engross House Bill 1635 and that the Speaker appoint a committee.
You've heard the motion in a second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed no. Motion is adopted. Turning to the calendar, Senate Bill 438, Representative Vermilion. Chair hands down final passage Senate Bill 438.
Senate Bill 438, a bill for enactment of the Indiana Code.
Chair recognizes Representative Vermilion to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. Senate Bill 438 is a continuation of what Representative Green had in that heart of a family. It requires FSSA to perform a comprehensive review of existing home health services for children with complex medical needs and utilizing a person-centered approach to engage those stakeholders, the family members, the children with complex medical needs, and the home health care providers in that assessment. We are severely lacking in our healthcare workers willing to work in this space. And I'd like to take the time to thank those family members and even the children that came to both committees that had those complex medical needs, just looking in an insight of what their world looks like in one day. This bill has been unanimous in all the committees in each chambers. And again, it's just asking FSSA to do a study on those home health services for children with complex medical needs. I'd appreciate your support. Thanks.
For discussion on the bill. Chair sees none. The author has the right to close. She waives it. Question is on final passage of the bill. All those in favor will, when machines don't vote aye. Those opposed vote no. While the members vote, they tell the roll. Roll call says 95 ayes, 2 noes. The bill has passed. Shall the title of the bill remain in the title of the act? Clerk shall inform Senate the passage of the bill. Senate Bill 474, Representative Ledbetter. Chair hands down final passage Senate Bill 474.
Senate Bill 474, a bill for enactment of the Indiana Code.
Chair recognizes Representative Ledbetter to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Currently, home health is experiencing critical access and workforce issues. This legislation takes steps to resolve those issues directly. Senate Bill 474 offers significant regulatory relief to home health agencies through the following statutory changes. It allows home health agencies to provide services in any county in Indiana without having to have a branch in that area. It removes the need for pre-employment physicals. It allows registered nurses to delegate G-tube and J-tube feedings to home health aides. They will require training for this. It repeals drug testing requirements. It should be known that this is an industry best practice, and liability insurers already incentivize drug testing. It allows home health agencies to remotely supervise their staff through telehealth. This is only allowed to be done once in a 60-day period, and they have to supervise the home health staff every 14 days. This bill also allows the Department of Health to have legal authority to waive home health regulations in case of emergency situations such as a pandemic. I want to thank my co-sponsor, Representative Barrett, and I would appreciate your support. Thank you.
For discussion on the bill? Chair sees none. The author has the right to close. She waives it. Question is on final passage of the bill. All those in favor will, when the machine's open, vote aye. All those opposed vote no. Representative Pack. While the members voted, tell the roll. Roll call says 96 ayes, 1 no. The bill has passed. Shall the title of the bill remain in the title of the act? Clerk shall inform Senate the passage of the bill. Senate Bill 486, Representative Teshka. Chair hands down final passage Senate Bill 486.
Senate Bill 486, a bill for enactment of the Indiana Code concerning.
Chair recognizes Representative Teshka to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House.
Senate Bill 486 is the product of an effort that Senator Rogers and I undertook over the last year or so to identify mandates in state code that are placed by us on our educators at the local level that are onerous or outdated. Senate Bill 486 is all about flexibility for our educators in the classroom, at the building level, and at the system level. The goal is to eliminate mandates that are either, again, outdated or unnecessary, so that our state's teachers can focus on educating Hoosier children. As we move more and more into a choice environment where parents can rightly choose the education environment that works best for their child, there's less need for us to be so prescriptive in our regulation of traditional public schools. It's time we take off the regulatory handcuffs and allow them to compete. The bill does this by repealing certain annual training requirements and moving these to the teacher prep programs. It also requires IDOE to develop an online platform for those trainings, paving the way for a more flexible training condition moving forward. The bill also removes much of the prescriptive language in code around teacher evaluations and urges the study committee to look at decreasing the number and frequency of state student assessments. Additionally, by removing the requirement that administrators discuss 16 specific items in a formal way, this bill treats educators as the professionals that they are by trusting them to communicate with each other as partners, not as adversaries, in the best way that is for the local district. This is just the beginning of deregulation efforts that I plan to undertake. I'll continue to work to identify these mandates, ones that can be rolled back, and to encourage sunsets for any new mandate so that we don't continue to pile on to our valued educators. I want to thank my co-sponsors, Representative Behning, King, and Jordan, and ask for your support.
For discussion of the bill, Representative Paff, speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, for 50 years, there's been a system in place for Hoosier teachers. I'm one of them, a system that has worked. In the military, it's called the chain of command. The idea is you don't bother the commander with every concern you have. This is essentially the same system in Indiana schools. Teacher discussions with the administration help make a better working environment for everyone, especially the students. So just to be clear, what we are saying in this bill is that you can talk to your staff if you want to, but you don't really have to. This legislature is creating more ways to arm teachers, but at the same time, we are taking away avenues for discussions of safety issues for students and employees in the workplace. The key to any relationship is communication, and with this bill, communication becomes optional. We heard in committee that it would be shocking if administrators didn't meet with their teachers, and that we should fire any administrator that didn't meet with their teachers. If that's the case, why are we putting the option into law that specifically allows an administrator to do the wrong thing? We should be passing laws that encourage teachers to stay in Indiana, not leave. Encourage discussion, not stifle it. I ask that you vote no.
Thank you. Please, if you have a response, if you're in the chamber, please, no response. Representative Hamilton, speak on the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, I too rise in opposition to SB 486. 7 years ago, in this coming June, I was first running for state representative, and I started knocking on doors that June. And that first week was hot and sunny, and I remember on day 2, very clearly one of the most impactful conversations I've had at anyone's doorstep in those 7 years. I was speaking with a teacher. She had 2 school-aged children and was married to a teacher, but she had just left the profession. And she was clearly heartbroken to be leaving the profession, but she and her husband, thinking about the future of their family, made the tough decision that one of them had to step away from the ever-increasingly stressful, long days of teaching with less and less respect, so often because of actions in this body, and with not reasonable pay for teachers with the high level of skill they've acquired throughout their educational training. Today we have teachers in the hallway fighting for their profession while we should be empowering them. Today we are removing their voice, their basic ability to have discussions with their administration, critical discussions. We learned, thank you Representative DeLaney for the history lesson last week, and Representative Klinker for sharing some insight about how important these conversations are in our schools to keep that school environment positive and productive for all of the adults in the building, such that the students are more likely to thrive. That 50 years of precedent established by Republicans 50 years ago, right? 50 years of precedent we're taking away. This is a process that has worked for our teachers and our administration and ultimately for our students. That process has been diminished in recent years by this body, but that still basic discussion was there until today. Unfortunately, I believe we're going to lose those basic rights that teachers have held dear. Teachers are the backbone of our society. We are chasing educators out of the state, if not out of the profession altogether. I'm alarmed. I'm truly alarmed. How can we build a thriving state with an educated workforce, with an educated citizenry in this climate? This is not the right thing to do to make our state strong, to help it thrive, to help our students succeed. I urge you to vote no.
For discussion on the bill, Representative Boyd, speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I, too, rise in opposition to this bill. I filed a bill in the past asking for increased wages for teachers. This year, I filed a bill asking for bargaining rights for teachers for school safety, uninterrupted planning periods, and class size. These are all part of what shall be discussed under current law. Of course, this bill was not heard in committee, but it almost sounds like they used mine as a model to take things away, like making items a may provision. Please. Despite comments by others that most superintendents are reasonable, I stand by my statement from last week. Some superintendents are wonderful people, others not so much. I remember one with the attitude of the beatings will continue until morale improves. This type of person would certainly not seriously consider regular meetings to discuss any of the issues they currently shall discuss. Please oppose this bill.
For discussion on the bill, Representative Klinker, speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I mentioned this last week, and I do want to reiterate this. As a former person who negotiated quite a few contracts and suffered through some of those, as some of you have as school board members and also teachers, I need to tell you that the discussable items have averted more strikes than I can ever mention. If you notice through the years, since collective bargaining passed in the 70s, there has been very, very few situations where strikes occurred. And we had one in Lafayette dealing with maintenance of standards. And the superintendent was in favor of keeping maintenance of standards as part of our contract, but a couple of school board members did not want that. So that ended up, unfortunately, in a difficult strike. Going back to discussable items and putting that into the contract solved many of those problems. So I'm asking you, please, do not get rid of discussion items. Whether it's mandated or may, it has provided so much good news for both teachers and administrators that I ask you to make sure that we put mandated before we're done here back into that bill. It's so important, folks. It has averted strikes more times than I can ever mention. Please consider doing that and vote no on this bill as it is now. Thank you.
Further discussion on the bill, Representative Bauer, speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I'm the daughter of two former public school teachers who met while teaching at Dickinson Middle School in South Bend, an art teacher and an English teacher, at a time when it was seen by this body as a respected profession, and when we as an elected body recognize their professional rights to bargain, to a safe working environment and learning environment, when we paid a fair wage that allows them to own a home, raise a family, and encourage them to stay in the state of Indiana. I'm here to represent the teachers in my district, many of whom are in the hallway today, including one of the author's former teachers, in fact, who are asking you to oppose this legislation, which would further erode the profession of a teacher in Indiana. I ask you to allow them to keep their right to negotiate, protect them by requiring it by law, and I ask you to vote no. Thank you.
Further discussion on the bill. Representative Lehman speak on the bill. The author yield, he yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Representative Teshka, I do have a couple of questions here because I know I usually don't get up on education issues, so I want to make sure I'm clear about something. It seems that I've been hearing this, the shall to a may, and they won't inject. But here's one question I really do have. So a school my size has maybe 100 school teachers, and probably less than 20 of them are part of the union. If, say, 40 of the school teachers who were non-union would come to the administration, to the superintendent, and say, we want to discuss one of these items, could they have that discussion?
The law, as it currently stands, only requires the exclusive representative of the teachers union to have.
Is there a prohibition on this? Could they have that conversation with the superintendent?
The way I read it is there's at least no requirement. I'm not, I think it would be up to the superintendent's discretion on whether or not he would discuss with those. But again, there's an exclusive representative for groups of teachers in the school.
All right, permission to speak. Like I said,
you're recognized, Representative Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like I said, seldom do I get up on education issues. I'm not an expert in this area, but I've been trying to pay attention more just around this one issue of 486. There's a lot of other good things in this bill that I think are really moving towards deregulation. The concern I have is I've had a few teachers reach out to me and said, well, our problem is we're not part of the union and we feel we have no voice. And so if the school's willing to continue this discussion with us, and we come as a collective group, but not the union, would this prohibit us from doing, would the current law prohibit us from actually having that meeting? And I reached out, I didn't know. So I reached out to my superintendents and I said, can you meet with non-union groups? And the answer was, we're not prohibited, but we run into some real problems if we do. So I think if our really goal here is that we want schools to engage with the teachers, all teachers, and talk about the things that are going to affect them every day in their classroom. I think it needs to be for all teachers, and therefore I think this is good language, and I ask you to support the bill.
For discussion on the bill, Representative Smith, speak on the bill.
I rise to join those who have spoken against this bill. As we explore the value of unions. In one of the books, I have a whole chapter about the value of unions and the impact, the positive impact they've had on instruction, on the classroom, and the education of our children. They have led to better working conditions, as well as better teaching conditions for the students. They have led to improvements in the curriculum, and they have improved the safety in our buildings. Collectively, teachers have been responsible for many of the improvements that we've found in public education. This particular, over the past, we have done all kinds of things. We have beat up on teachers here in the legislature, called them ineffective and that they weren't on task and so forth. We have demoralized the field, the career area. We have painted a picture of teachers that have led to disrespect for them, a profession that was poorly paid but highly respected. we have attempted to impact their salaries by saying that if they go back and get further education, acquire higher degrees, that school corporations could not pay them any additional money for doing that. We have tampered with all kinds of conditions that lead to a negative climate and culture in our schools. And now we have a teacher shortage. And what do we want to do? We don't want to keep the teacher force intact. We continue to attack them. And our answer to the solution of the shortage of teachers is to look up additional ways, of alternative ways of getting people into the classroom, people who are not prepared academically and through experience to teach our children today. We have a force here that's out here of minorities who don't want to be a part of the union, and you have a right not to be a part of the union. But the unions also understand that they're negotiating for the whole teacher population. You want a small minority, one or two people who want to be swords on their own, rebels on their own, to outrule what the majority says. We had some discussion here on the floor a moment ago saying that the majority, you may have 100 teachers, that was the example, and only maybe 20 of them want to be a part of the union. That is not the case. The majority of teachers are participating in the union. It's this small minority that wants to rule the majority. And that's not democracy. Democracy doesn't work that way. You have to give in. That's the problem why this country is split now, because the persons who lost want to dictate to the majority. And democracy doesn't work that way. We have had a union-busting effort going on during these 33 years that I've been here. What do we do, first of all? We came up with right to work. What right to work means is you have a right to work for a lower salary. You have a right to work in poor conditions. Those are the rights that you have. And then we started attacking the unions in a way that said that we can limit your bargaining areas. We limited it to salary and benefits. And to compensate for that, we said, you shall discuss certain issues. Now we're taking that away from them. Let me just tell you about something. Principals are extremely busy, especially if they're trying to be effective. And if they don't have to spend time in discussions, they're not going to do it. They're interested in dealing with the mandates that they're required to do. We would think that a good democratic leader would want to communicate, because the research shows if you're going to have effective schools, that you must have good communication and you must have collaboration. Those are two threads that run through public education. And when we eliminate the responsibility to communicate, when we eliminate the responsibility to collaborate, I've told you over and over again, there's none of us as smart as all of us. If we were working together, that's how you get team action. That's what leads to touchdowns. It's the communication. And when you start attacking that, you're attacking the effectiveness of schools. Going back to the right of work, we are ignoring what the public wants, what the public says. And I give you this example of right to work. 2/3 of the people, when they were surveyed, was against right to work. And 69% was against passage of the bill that we passed. I think that was back in 2010 or 2011, dealing with right to work. This body is not dealing with the desires of the community. They're the people who think they know it all, and they're just projecting what their feelings are. We are not walking with the people of this community, the people of this state. And so I urge you to vote no against this bill. It is destructive for quality education. And to those people who are here to tell us what their desires are, because we're representing people, and I think you have more of your people out there than I have of my people out there. I urge the people, if this body does not want to listen, to take your fight to the courts. And if the courts don't listen to you, I'll join you in taking the fight to the streets. Thank you.
Further discussion on the bill. Representative Arrington to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. In 2017, the Indiana General Assembly took away the right of Muncie citizens to vote for our school board. Effectively, that bill took away our voice. In the beginning, after that law passed, I was hearing from Democrats who thought that was wrong. Now I'm hearing from Republicans in the district who want to go back to elected school boards. That same piece of legislation made collective bargaining optional. It up to the administration as to whether they wanted to have it or not. So here we are today looking at another bill that's designed to limit the voice of a group of people, in this case, the teachers. What do they have left in Muncie if not the ability to discuss issues that have come up in their classrooms? Now, I do believe that our current superintendent is open to these discussions, but that's not everybody. So why do we have this penchant to limit what locals want to do? The local ability to solve problems for ourselves. So I want to encourage you to vote no on this bill because it's really anti-democratic. It's anti-ability to solve our problems locally. Thank you.
Discussion on the bill. Representative Leader G. Quinn to speak on the bill. Author yield, he yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Teshka, just a couple of questions. Who brought this bill forward? Who was kind of behind this idea?
So Senator Rogers and myself started working on deregulation efforts either during or at the tail end of the last session.
So through this, your research, you've been in the classroom and in buildings, school buildings.
Yeah, we've talked to many educators on all the classroom level, building level, administrative.
Yeah, and it's from these discussions that you've figured out that they don't want to have to communicate with their superintendents and principals to discuss these.
So I think, again, what we're talking about is eliminating a state mandate for a required prescriptive form. We're not eliminating anybody's right to communicate. We're not eliminating any type of communication between adults here. We're saying that that can happen, and we trust that to happen between adult professionals.
So specifically tell me again what the problem is here that we're trying to solve.
With which part of the bill? Because I think that it's important to recognize that the bill has more than one thing that it does.
Well, I'll leave it up to you, but when we're talking about changing the shall provision to a may provision with regards to which items that you can discuss, what is the problem that we're trying to solve?
Yeah, so I think it's on multi-level. It's multi-levels. I think one, which was mentioned at this mic a little while ago, was that in some districts we have sub 50, sub 40% union participation, and those non-union teachers are feeling like they're getting iced out of discussions. I think part of it is building level and system level administrators saying, hey, we have other things to talk about. We've got this very prescriptive list of 16 things that we need to talk about. Otherwise, that we can be found in noncompliance and be unfair labor practice can be filed, et cetera. And so, if there's continually discussion about things on an ongoing basis over and over again with no resolution, I think that can tie up the hands of the administrators.
Okay, because right now it's a shall provision.
It's a shall provision.
And you're saying that the items that we currently are allowed to discuss, that teachers are allowed to discuss,
That they shall
is a bad thing. And then finally, you made the comment earlier about that we're moving into a choice environment. Have you given up on public education?
I've not given up on public education, no. In fact, my child goes to a public school.
Permission to speak.
You're recognized,
Thank you, Representative Teshka. It's been said a couple of times, I know we've heard about the history and all this, and the 50 years, Representative DeLaney, you mentioned that last week, and unfortunately, so often the bills that we've seen this session have been solutions in search of problems, and this is another one that we're hearing today. We've seen the discussion, the items that you can discuss, class size, safety, curriculum, those sorts of things. And the reason it was set up, as you mentioned, Representative DeLaney, is because this is part of the problem-solving mechanism that was put in place. There's nothing better than having discussions, communicating with folks. We have caucus meetings before we come in here to discuss some things. Sometimes they go a little bit longer than we like to. I encourage ranking members to have some pre-session meetings so that they can know what bills are going to be discussed and alleviate maybe some issues that they're going to have in a committee meeting. We have caucus meetings outside of session, and we do that so that I'm able to communicate with my members. One of the many strengths that the Speaker has is his ability, I believe, to discuss issues with me. And I know I've heard it from you all, been a great improvement. I think it's been a better improvement for how the legislature has been run because the Speaker has been willing to engage with us in discussing of items. I think that defeating this bill is a big mistake. I tell you what it's going to do. It's going to send the signal, send a message to teachers. I said passing this. I want to defeat this bill, you know what I mean. Sorry about that. Mondays can be tough, but anyway. So what I'm afraid is that the message that you're going to send to not only the folks up in the balcony, but out in the hallway, is that your opinion doesn't matter. That we don't value you, we don't value your opinion. And I just think that's a bad thing. And here's what's going to happen, I'm afraid, is that these type of discussion, these decisions are going to be just kind of made at the superintendent level. They're going to be made just, frankly, at the school board level without the value of input from teachers. And it's been said also that, we're having a difficult time hiring teachers. We're having a difficult time keeping them. And one of the things that I've also mentioned a few times here over the last few years is I know that teachers do not get into this profession for the money. They're not going to get rich. We know that. I think they need to be paid more, don't get me wrong. But I also think the most important thing that teachers want to do is they want to be able to teach. They really do. And when they bring these discussionable items to their superintendents, to their principals, is because they want to solve problems. They don't bring them to complain. They bring them, here's some issues that we have, and by the way, here are some solutions as well. I'm afraid what's going to probably happen, as we've seen it in the past, there'll be kind of two appointments on the calendar, and I don't really have to take care of this one since it's not a shall anymore, so I'll get to you all later. I'm going to do this thing over here. I'm going to attend to this meeting instead. So while the meetings may still continue for a little while, we all know they're going to fade away, they're going to drop off. And that's just naturally, that's what unfortunately I'm afraid what's going to happen if this bill passes. So I would strongly encourage you to defeat Senate Bill 486. Let's keep that provision of the shall provision in law that's going to say we're going to allow teachers, we're going to allow you to bring those discussionable items to superintendents. Let's solve our problems, and let's do it for our kids and for better schools. Thank you very much.
Further discussion? Chair sees none. The author has the right to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that I'd like to shine a spotlight back on some of the important parts of this bill. Over the interim, when in meetings and discussions over and over again, we heard after we identified a list of hundreds of mandates throughout the Indiana Code that are levied on our local schools, we asked what would be most impactful if we could take these things off of your plate. And we heard over and over again, required trainings, required curriculum, required assessments. Those were all from our classroom level educators. And in this bill, we tried to address two of those things at least, with required trainings, annual trainings, with the rollback of some of those and putting those onto the teacher prep programs. I'd like to address more, and I'd like to continue to do that. And also, I'd like to sunset any new mandated trainings so that we always have a reason to come back and look at those to see if they're working, if they're necessary, if they're outdated. We have a provision in this bill that deals with assessments and asking for a study committee to see if we can reduce the frequency of assessments. There's nothing more that I hear from teachers back home in my district than we are doing way too many assessments. It's not healthy for the kids. It's not conducive to instruction, and it's not necessary. And so this bill tries to take a step in that direction. And yes, it does have a provision about discussion. And I agree with Leader Giaquina that there's nothing more important than communication. And I agree that it's very important to me as a member of this body to have caucus leaders and leaders in this body that listen. I would walk over a bed of coals for this speaker. I respect him that much. And it's because he picks up the phone when I call. He'll answer a text, even though I know he's got hundreds of other messages waiting. But it means so much more because he doesn't have to do it. He doesn't have to do it. Forced relationship is no relationship at all. This bill will not prevent anybody from having any meaningful discussion on conditions in their school. And with that, I'd ask for your support. Thank you.
Question is on final pass of the bill. All those in favor will, machines will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. While the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 63 ayes, 36 noes. The bill is passed. Shall the title of the bill remain the title of the act? Clerk sound for and send the pass of the bill. Is there further business in front of the chamber? Chair sees none. Representative Karickhoff for a motion. You heard the motion is second. All those in favor, in case saying aye. Those opposed, no. Motion is adjourned.